Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I am sporting my Coons Ford Security Boulevard shirt, and I've also got my my beautiful wild blue for John Mayer, my blue Maryland Lottery mask. We're going to be letting ourselves play beginning March 4th. The Maryland Crab Cake Tour comes back to Mama's on the Half Shell down in Canton to honor Scunny and honor our Nacho Mama's friends and that delicious burrito quesadilla I've been getting out in Towson as well. So much going on here. Baseball lockout. I keep calling it a strike, but that's such a passe word. It's a lockout. And Marty Conway joins us here. Not only just the good professor from Georgetown, but they've also given him a sweatshirt. I appreciate that you have the Georgetown sweatshirt. Looking good, bud. Man, I don't know where to start. I mean, I guess we could start with McCartney and the Orioles. We'll get to the Ravens and Sashi Brown and Dick Caswell. But I don't think I've ever needed you more than I need you right now. The last couple of weeks, the business of sports so front and center, I think, for all of this, whether it's the Ravens and the Orioles and all these sort of really big picture things you and I talk about, that when I talk to people like at the Baltimore Banner, they're launching a news organization. They talk to me about, the state of Baltimore sports. I said, well, there's going to be new owners here the next 5 years. And if you're going to follow something in the marketplace here, following where these franchises are going with new leadership, really, really important, because Marty, as you know, this is where it got off the curve back in '92.
Yeah, no, exactly. Look, there's the playing season for whatever sport you want to talk about, and then there's the business season. And in the case of the NFL, it's always the business season because there's always something that's a part of it. But, surprisingly, while inflation is going up 7 or 8 or 9% or more, franchise values for these teams, regardless of COVID, regardless of any inflationary or potential recessionary things, they continue to go up. So when you say, the Denver Broncos are on the verge in the next few months of being sold, certainly most people think for north of $4 billion. The question is, how close to 5 does it get? Does it land somewhere in the middle at 4.5? And every one of those other NFL owners and their families look at that and say, could that be us? And
do you think Steve Bisciotti, when he put that money out, ever thought he was going to sell his thing for 3? But did he have that prescience?
No, because when you look at what, and we'll talk about Dick Cass's leadership, soon. But when he came on, when Steve bought the team, all of it from the Models, he bought it for $600 million, right? Now, again, like I said, we're going to get a full comp when the Broncos sell. But the speculation, the informed speculation, the valuations have them somewhere in the $3.4 to $3.6 billion range right now. That's a 6x increase in 18 years, right? Ooh. There's not businesses out there that
it's doing 30% compounded, kind of sort of, right, like I'm doing the math.
Again, unless you're in the tech business or you're in the something like that, you've seen those kind of increases in multiples in the technology business where the margins are really high. The profit margins are really high. So you look at that and you say, like, how much more do I need if I'm going to walk away with $3 or $4 billion, maybe something less because I've got some other expenses that I've contributed along the way. You can do a lot with that. You can do an awful lot with that. So I don't know that they are, but when I group the NFL franchises, I group them in 2 groups. I group them in the family heirloom group, which are the Maras and the Joneses and people like that. And then there's another group, it's not that big anymore, it's a half a dozen perhaps, who look at that and say, my family's not going to run this business forever and ever. This was a great trade, and I'll win some championships. I think the thing to watch there is the term of John Harbaugh, because I think Steve Bisciotti and John Harbaugh are tied inexorably at the hip. And if John Harbaugh coaches 5 more years or whatever that number is, then the Steve Bisciotti ownership might coincide with that. So, but the point being is, back to our original point, the increase in these values is exponential, and some people choose to cash in on that, and others, are going to ride it out for the family. And it's one of those two things.
Well, and it's also whether they're having a good time doing it. I mean, Steve's disappeared. I mean, Steve clearly does not love this and waving to the crowd and being a part of all. Like, Steve's disappeared, and now Dick Cass disappeared at 6 o'clock on a Friday night. I mean,
Yeah.
who's giving them advice on this? This
Yeah.
isn't Kevin. Kevin Byrne didn't run
Yeah,
the place
no.
this way. Kevin
Yeah.
Byrne is long gone, doing 6 p.m. dumps of a 2-decade valued president, and then
Yeah.
hiring an African American at a time during a week where the league was taking on as much heat about its overt racism at the top than it's taken on in a long time.
Yeah, back to Dick's announcement, they were clearly pushed. The NBA media machine never stops. And that was how that was outed. Whether it was Woj or somebody else from ESPN got news of this, and immediately, even though let's be quite honest, Sashi Brown's position with the Monumental Sports wasn't as high profile enough to announce he's leaving. Quite frankly, he wasn't the general manager. He wasn't the president of basketball ops in the basketball side of things. But nonetheless, it was a news event, so it was pushed out. Clearly, the Ravens got pushed into that and had to say something on Friday at 6 o'clock. Clearly not what they wanted to. And so it was very defensive. That I think there's no question about that. That was very defensive. Then they had to sort of get on the front foot, put out a note, a day
I would
or two
almost
later.
call it sloppy. If you get caught flat-footed with your president, it's sloppy. It's like Stephen Ross putting Jim Harbaugh on planes and sneaking him around. It's crazy.
Yeah. Again, I think the way that probably played out for them is, Sashi was going to start March 1st. They probably had some date in mind that they thought they'd been able, but nonetheless, there are no secrets in the sport business anymore. So they should have been ready for that. But so then what happened was a day or two later, they had to try to put more of a positive press release out about Dick's tenure to have it more front foot. But I do think, and so it was poorly handled. There was a lot of contributing factors to it. But I do think sometime between now and when Sashi begins in early March, there'll be some sort of joint press conference. And I do think in this case, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think Steve shows up. I think Steve shows up for this to answer the questions, to give Dick his proper send-off, maybe to answer and address some. Now, it may be the only time that he comes in and becomes available for the press for another year, but I do think there's that. So that's a long way around the poll here around sort of what happened. But point being is back to that question about how much you've seen somebody. When you measure a CEO of a company, I don't care if it's Microsoft or the Baltimore Ravens, you measure them in how much they increase the enterprise value of the team or the company in their tenure. In public companies, we see it in the overall enterprise value, stock value, all of that. We can do the same with a private company like the Ravens. So we got a 6x increase while Dick Cass was president of the team. Now, again, some of that is just the nature of the NFL growing their national revenues. But the point being is Baltimore is a market that is somewhere around the low 20s, 27, 28, and getting smaller. Other markets are surpassing that. So while the market size was going down, unlike Atlanta and other places, the franchise value was in the middle. I think the last Forbes valuation had the Ravens somewhere around 17. So in so many regards,
that outkicks their coverage to some degree.
They were just punching above their weight for sure. And a lot of that
was because of the success of the franchise and how beloved the franchise is where it's beloved. It's not Jacksonville. It's not one of these outpost franchises, right?
Right. And the decisions that they've made along the way to invest in digital media, to invest in other areas that have grown their footprint so that they could. Now, again, you've got to have sustained success. Two seasons out of the playoffs changes the nature of a franchise in a place like Baltimore, and that's why you can't afford it as much as possible. So that, I think that will be the roses that are thrown Dick's way as he leaves, and that is what he's done for the size of the franchise, but also what he's done for the team and the community. He's put them on the front foot in a lot of ways that I think his legacy will be there for decades to come, I think.
Other than the punch in the elevator and how they dealt with that with Ray Rice, I mean, I would
Yeah.
say Dick's tenure's been almost impeccable. Anything you want to say about that? Because you aspired to those jobs and worked for the Larry Lucchinos of the world. Dick Cass did a hell of a job.
Yeah, and again, these are not positions that you normally hear about when somebody's leaving. Like when somebody leaves on the business side, there's just not that much. It's not like a general manager or coach or players or whatever it is. It's just not that. So you have to, sort of take a reflect. And it doesn't happen that often. It only happens typically when franchise change hands. Somebody passes away, the owner sells, whatever it is, and then there's that sort of reflection process. But as I said earlier, a little bit, you've got the Washington franchise 40 some miles below them. You've got the Eagles franchise an hour and a half above them. You've got the Steelers franchise to the west an hour and a half. So it's such a small marketplace that what they were able to do with that small market, they should be somewhere in the mid to low 20s in terms of franchise valuations. But they've been able to turn it because they've been able to take a lot of local revenues. And what I was explaining recently is, yes, they get, a big chunk of their revenues from national sources, media, sponsorship, all those NFL things. But what they get from local revenues are the reason why you can hire more coaches. It's the reason why you can have more strength and conditioning. It's the reason why you can do all these things to help the
By the way,
competitive
I was
side.
told they have more scouts than any other team. Eric Edholm, who covers this for a living, says the
Yeah,
Ravens have
yeah,
invest more,
yeah.
like the Yankees do on the baseball side, invest
Right.
more in player
Yeah.
development.
There's only so much you can do on the salary cap side. So all that other local revenue, right, can get plowed into the things that are behind the scenes, back office stuff, scouting, player development, medical, all these other areas, analytics that you think would give you the greatest opportunity to win. So when you're growing those, whether it's seat licenses, whether it's sponsorship, whether it's media deals, all those different things that you can do are able to contribute to that. So also, I think, look, this change probably would have happened a year or so earlier had COVID not hit. And I think that more than likely extended Dick's reign because he didn't want to have this transition in the middle of it. And also, I'll say this, he was a cheerleader for the people inside that organization. He represented them to Steve, I'm pretty sure, in ways. I know during COVID, there were some teams that cut people, cut salaries, didn't give bonuses, didn't give all the things that went with it. That didn't happen with the Ravens. They continued to power through it. Yes, they cut some expenses in different places, but in terms of people, they continued to invest. They hired more people on the business side, and they didn't roll anything back. It wasn't like you didn't get your bonus or you didn't get your salary increase, whatever. They continued to do that. So it was hard on the problem, but easy on the people. I think that's one of the signatures of Dick's reign.
Marty Conway's here. I actually called him to talk about the Orioles and Paul McCartney and Jet and Live and Let Die.
Yep.
And then there's the Orioles, and then there's Major League Baseball, and then there's no spring training, and then there's back to where, and you're very, very familiar with this, your livelihood depended on it the last time, back in 93, 94. So did mine. And I'm so glad at this point that I'm not vested in it. I'm glad for you that you walked away from baseball 30 years ago, because the people that are in it right now, it's tragic what they're doing, and especially on the backside of the plague where they almost didn't play 2 years ago. This is sort of heinous greed and really a lack of awareness for where they are in the marketplace.
So yeah, and there's a lot of things to unpack with that, but where they stand right now, players and owners in the rooms that they're in Florida, talking about the issues that they're talking about, virtually none of them, virtually none. I'll point out one or two maybe that might be, virtually none of them, when they finally get to their decision, whether it's in days or weeks or a month, virtually none of them have any impact on the fans. None, right? So it doesn't shorten games. It doesn't make things more exciting on the field. It is strictly grievances. And in the case of the players, it's grievances from the last two collective bargaining agreements in the structure of those, and then what the owners were able to do as a result of the structure, right? You had 5 or 6 or 7 teams choosing not to be really competitive because they thought that was the only way that they could reboot the franchise to try to have this Houston Astros type rebirth.
Tanking, but then encouraging people to bet on the games.
Yeah, exactly. So, and so I'm saying the players look at this as grievances in terms of a Chris Bryant being held out for 3 weeks to start his major league career because the Cubs wanted to extend and have an additional almost full year of Chris Bryant under control. It happened in Seattle with Jared Kalanick. I mean, there were different examples of it.
Well, it hasn't happened here because Rutschman and Rodriguez they're not ready to bait. Right. They're not ready to come out of the oven yet, right? Literally.
And I will even tell you this year, I think regardless of what happens, you're not going to see him until May. Like it's still going to be a similar scenario. So you have owners and players. Owners do not want, from what I read and understand and talk to people, the owners don't want to tinker with the structure of it in terms of the competitive balance tax, luxury tax, all these different things. There is one thing that I think they'll get to at the end, and ultimately it'll be a horse trade, and that's additional rounds of playoffs. That is something that would benefit the fans because it would bring in somewhere between an additional 8 and 16 postseason games, which would, number one, benefit fans because we like postseason baseball more than we like regular season. We like games that have meaning, not games that don't. And from the players and owners, they're going to be able to sell those games to the network at a much higher rate than you get for a regular season game because it has meaning. So I think that's to me, that's the biggest disappointment is after years and decades, they're still arguing over things that only matter to owners and players that don't have any. And then once it's over, the players will push back. They won't want the umpires to speed up in between innings. So like they'll kind of be back to where we were. The dollars will be divvied up the way they're going to be divvied up. But I don't think fans will look at this and say, we're better off because they're only going to sign a 5-year labor agreement. And what will happen is we'll have 3 years of labor peace and then 2 years of, oh my goodness, this next round's going to come and where we'll be. So
are you chicken little about them not playing? I mean, is there some point where you feel like they'll get on the field on or around opening day or where? Yeah. You've been a part of this more, and I'm so far removed from it. I remember how acrimonious it was 30 years ago. I'm sure it's just as acrimonious, and there's somebody there they can hate that's not named Marvin Miller or Donald Fear or or Mark Belanger, the old Gene Orza, the old names, right? But this new group, there's some real bad blood here, right? I mean, and maybe it's FU because there's enough money involved and maybe there's enough owners that don't care about playing enough that we won't have baseball in 5 weeks.
Well, I think so. The 2020 season, the 60-game truncated season, was just a preview for this to see how this kind of works. Both sides have calculated what each game is worth to them. The owners know what a game is worth. The players know what their paycheck is worth. So keep in mind the Max Scherzers and the Paul Goldschmidts and the guys that are in the room for the Players Association, their game checks are now substantial. So I'm sure Max Scherzer has enough money to live on. He's saying, hey, if I miss 5 or 10 games, and we play 152 or 154 instead of 161, they're at the point.
Well, it's always about the rich guys, right? They're the ones that kind of control this, right? To some degree, the veterans have always been like, if they're telling Junior to hold the line, Adley Rutschman, the young guys fall in line with leadership. It's always been that way.
It has always been that way. And what the current group of players who are representing the association are trying to say is we see a lot of hardship in the younger players. Now, keep this in mind. Whether we're preventing Chris Bryant, for example, or Adley Rutschman from getting to his free agent year, 1 year sooner, the dollars that they're making are in that time, right? The new minimum salary for a player is going to be somewhere between $650,000 and $750,000. The average salary still sits at about $4 million. And by the time we know this from the Manny Machado period, by the time you're into your 5th year, 1 year before free agency, your arbitration numbers in the $20 million range. So
it's more than all the money you made the first 5 years by lot.
These are not hardships that any of us should worry about, even though the players are saying we want to We want something better for these younger period. Look, the trade-off has always been for the owners, it's about getting value, meaning you get more performance than what you're paying for in the first 5 or 6 years than you get, right? Juan Soto is talking about turning down a 10-year, $350 million deal from the Nationals, right? The Nationals are saying, we will never get more value out of Juan Soto than when he was a 0 to 6 year player. So no matter what we pay him, whether he wants 350 million or 450 million, he will never be quote unquote worth it because the value is in that first 6 years. Because once you get to your 29, age 30 year, production starts to fall off. You have one good year, you have one average year, et cetera. So that's what the disagreement is about. If you were asking me for a projection, I think they go through this week. They gain some progress in negotiations. They're not ready to sign anything. Then they start to truncate the season. We start looking at 162 games. How can we mash that into a fewer game days, maybe a few more double headers in order to get the 162? But at some point in early April, if we're not playing, it's just impossible to make up those games later on. So whether we end up with a 154 game schedule, I don't know, but it'll be something in that range, I would guess, if we don't get the full schedule.
Marty Conway is here, the good professor from Georgetown University. You would be wise to follow him out on LinkedIn as well as Twitter for all sports and sports business. All right, so Marty, the leak happens last Thursday on McCartney, and my little reporter hat went on because I have to know first because that's who I am. And I threw out all my usual lifelines to people in your community and other communities trying to get the date. And I fell asleep. I made the cardinal mistake of falling asleep a little early. My deep throat hit me around 9:45 p.m. and I fell asleep. So I woke up at 3 a.m. and I saw the date. And I thought, I went to the Orioles website, Orioles.com, to look at their schedule to make sure that the date meshed because it said JUN 12. And I'm like, did he mean July? All-Star, So I looked, I'm like, oh, okay, June 12th, that'll work. That's good. And, I went to the Orioles website and I see that they literally have taken their company, all of them, and put that white smudge gloss like they used to have in the mall where they put the paper up in the glass. And that's their website now. Then they march a guy that nobody's familiar with but me, because at one point he put my face on a dartboard over 1300, TJ Brightman, allowing the Bird to announce a Paul McCartney show and Jim Palmer's jersey. And McCartney's turning 80. So I thought maybe an 80 jersey. It's his birthday. Whatever. I don't think Paul's not running away from 80. I think he's proud of 80. What did you make of all? And then John flies in via Zoom to put his feet up. I was not invited to the press conference, so I had no. They've learned to keep me out now. What do you make of where the Orioles are and doing this in the middle of a lockout? And no one asked the owner, hey, you're locking the players out. What do you think, John? You have an opinion on this? You own the team.
Yeah. So, excuse me. Back to the pandemic scenario, right? So the first concert was a few years ago, Billy Joel, right? And that, went over as well as it could be. First, you're not going to make a mistake with Billy Joel, right? It's just not going to be.
But you said it went over well. John Angelos got the ledger at the end of the night and said, holy shit, we made more money tonight than we've ever made. Literally, right? Is that true with beer and something? When they packed a place like that, because Billy Joel's getting $280 a ticket. John's not getting a lot. I mean, I don't know where the break even is on that. And I'm thinking if they won the bid to get it, they've kind of overpaid to get it in general if they got the bid, right?
Yeah, well, it depends on whichever you're going. My assumption is that they working with the promoter for the tour, for the event, et cetera, and then negotiating with the venue.
But why wouldn't the Ravens want it in their stadium? Why wouldn't Nats Park? You know what I mean? There are other places that would say, I'll take McCartney and make money on that. People will come and see McCartney.
Yeah, my hunch, this is just a hunch, that in terms of Nats Park has figured this out. They've been doing this longer than the Orioles have. And so their dates coincided. I'm not going to break any news here, but I'm pretty sure Bruce Springsteen tour will be hitting Nats Park later this year once they announce that stadium tour. So I suspect that that's a part of it. Number one. Number two, the Washington market is just bigger. And so if you're an act that's going to hit one or the other and you have that chance, depending on if you're on tour, you can hit Washington and then you can hit Baltimore 9 months later or whatever. But point being is when you do something like that, chances are, if unless you're going to promote it yourself, which I'm almost certain they're not, you're just going to work with a promoter and you're going to put up your opportunity and say, here's how much of the house we're willing to slide to you, and here's what we expect to get on food and beverage and parking and some of these other areas, ancillary type areas. And they look at that and they say, how, is that enough profit for us to sort of get the engines running? In terms of M&T, it's interesting that you haven't seen, at one point, the Ravens and Steve Bisciotti and the Ravens business organization was all behind bringing many more events to M&T Stadium. They brought the lacrosse championships. They had some other
The big
stadium
soccer
events.
game was amazing. That, that night was
Yep.
really special for Baltimore.
Yep, the big soccer game. Jay-Z, Beyonce, Justin Timberlake concert. I mean, there were a few others in
Garth
there,
Brooks
right?
was booked, right?
Right. But to marshal your organization, your ticket organization, all those things that you have to stand up to do it, is a lot to give to the city, quite honestly, in return for renovations on the stadium, doing some other things like that to bring it in. So for the team, if they're going to get involved in any way, running their box office or doing the things that are going to be supportive, bringing in their stadium personnel and doing that, there has to be some sort of obvious flashing green return. And I think, honestly, the Ravens have made the calculation that we're gonna focus on football. If there's something else great that the city really, really wants us to do, we'll do that. But I think they're happy, frankly, to hand the baton off to their brethren, on the other side of Ravens Walk, and say, why don't you pull that rope for a little bit? You seem to be want to doing that. And the new lease agreement, the amended lease agreement between the Orioles and the Stadium Authority, gave the team more control over that. In the past, they've had virtually no control over events that ran, other than a veto power, events that ran on non-game days. And now they have some ability to generate some revenue from it. And for this year, they're going to need it, because you've seen what the last 3+ years have done to attendance, season ticket sales, and others. So they'll be picking up dollars here that will be incremental to them.
Paul McCartney coming to Baltimore. Marty Conway, is there anything you want to say about John? Anything you want to say about TJ Brightman? Anything you want to say about them having a press conference in the middle of a lockout? And it is a little awkward,
Yeah, again, I think they were put in a position where the act was going out. If you watched on social media, the act has got, Paul McCartney and his group have gone out and they are actively promoting the tour. So this announcement was coming as to what the dates are. In fact, I think it's only is it about a 12-city tour?
Yeah, it's 12
or something
cities.
Like
It's a lot of baseball stadiums and a couple of arenas too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not huge in that regard. And so this was an opportunity. The curious thing, obviously, was the control person, John Angelos, not being in the room, not being there in person, whatever that was about. The choice to be available via Zoom as opposed to in person. I guess, compared to Steve Bisciotti not being there at all over the last 4 years or so, that was at least something. But I would have thought that, but again,
boy, when you're giving John points over Steve, we've really have fallen. I mean, and it's not being mean. It's just sort of like, you own the freaking team. You direct the team. Show up. Just be front facing. For both of these guys. And it wouldn't matter whether their name was Irsay and Hofberger or whether it was Jacobs or BBW. Be front facing. It's not, you own a franchise that represents the city. Be proud of that and step up. That just step up. That's all.
Well, particularly in this city, particularly in Baltimore, right? Because there's a legacy, there's a history. Ownership of a sports franchise in Baltimore City is not like owning a franchise in Washington or Charlotte or Jacksonville. I'll be honest, I think it just means more. I think it means more to people, fans, citizens, residents, to feel like they have at least some sort of, whatever you might want to describe it, whether an actual or perceived relationship with the owner. It goes back to when the Orioles players, there was a perceived relationship with Brooks and Boog and all these other people, because that's the nature of the city. It's a city of neighborhoods. It's not this sprawling
Well, that's how you used
metropolis.
to sell tickets. It wasn't about
Yeah,
gambling on it or your fantasy
right.
team. It was straight up provincialism. It's
Yeah.
straight up us against them.
And these were
That's
people
why
that,
I'm Baltimore positive and not anything else. I mean, that's what sold this. It's not what's
yeah,
selling it anymore. I
right.
certainly see that with the young people at football games. They're not there because they love Baltimore. They're
No,
not.
no, no, it's to be seen. It's the selfie image. It's all those other things. But it goes back to the time when Edward Bennett Williams bought the Orioles. There was a sense of, oh my God, somebody from Washington has bought the team. This is going to be awful. He's going to move it, etc. No owner that I was ever around was more accessible than Edward Bennett Williams. He came to virtually every game from DC. The media could walk into his little suite that he had, ask him questions. He'd give them an impromptu answer and press conference for the most part. And that calmed everybody's nerves, right? And then the same thing with Eli Jacobs and all that. There was always somebody local like Larry Lucchino to be there. So point being is I think that's just it's expected in the city, and it's more of a shock, it's more of a disruption when that individual isn't present. And regardless of whether it's Dick Cass or TJ Brightman, it's just not the owner, quite honestly. And there are mountaintop moments, and I would have considered the Paul McCartney announcement, just like the Billy Joel announcement several years ago, to be one where everybody on the stage is as the most senior leadership there. Because again, you're right, not only to answer questions about that event, but to address questions about other things for a few minutes. Even in the case of if you're a Major League Baseball owner right now, there's more risk in you talking about the lockout than there is benefit, but there are artful ways to steer that question off stage and answer direct questions about how you think the franchise has done in the 3+ years of Mike Elias and other things like that. And I think that's kind of where there was a sense of, I don't know if I want to really directly answer that question. But again, back to the point about owning a team in Baltimore. I don't care whether you own a soccer team or a baseball team or a football team. There's just an expectation that you will be physically present more often than we've seen over the last several years. For whatever it's worth, whatever the reasons are, it's just not as comforting to people, and puts more pressure on your general manager or your coach to be not only, the baseball or football side, but to be sort of the PR leader, which most of them aren't comfortable with.
The face of the organization. Marty Conway is the face of Georgetown and the sports business program there. You can follow him out on LinkedIn as well as on Twitter and other social media. Anything else you want to add? You done with the halftime show? You done with that? We have no baseball. I don't know the next time I'm going to have you on. We might have a new owner around here or something, right?
Well, there is this gap. Normally it's a gap when the Super Bowl is over until, pitchers and catchers or the first baseball game. Now, unfortunately, in the Baltimore area, we don't know when the next live sports event will be, because we're just in the balance. That is not good for the business of selling whatever you're selling. And so we're now looking at 2 years of COVID related restrictions, limited games, limited seats available. I think it's going to be really difficult to put tickets on sale this year for a baseball team and alleviate people's fears about COVID and security and the competitiveness of the team and all that. I think this will be another difficult year at the box office. I think the back half of the year could be better than the first half. But anytime you have people not in the habit of spending, they've just changed where they're spending their money on. And let's be honest, if we continue to get inflationary pressure and gas prices rise and there's threats of recession, the first place that people pull their money in is on these kind of expenditures. And so, unfortunately, I think that might be a little bit of a cloud ahead as well.
We will continue to talk about the woes of the Orioles and Major League Baseball and getting them on the field, as well as the Ravens getting ready for a 2022 campaign on a 6-game losing streak. That's not going to change between now and September. Marty, appreciate you. Love you. We'll hit a Michi soon, or we'll get a crab cake soon. Do something, all right?
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
You got it. And, I love when you come on here and start talking about Springsteen tours this summer. Like when you're breaking that news. Breaking news, man. Come on, bring it out.
Yeah, I think he's going to be outdoors. He's going to be outdoors before he's indoors. So I think it's stadiums first.
I'm not making any plans. I'm keeping my schedule open for Bruce at this point. Marty Conway is our guest. He's down at Georgetown. He's also out on the internet anytime, anywhere. I am Nestor. You can find me Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. Get the Maryland Crab Cake Tour rolling on March 4th. We're starting at Mama's on the Half Shell down in Canton. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore positive.